Random introduction. So my name is Callum Ward. I'm a board member from Spreydon and board chair.
Kia ora tātou, ko Arohanui Grace Tōpūnga. I'm Arohanui Grace, I'm the governance manager here.
Yes, good afternoon. My name's Will Hall, community board member for Heathcote.
Kia ora, Melanie Coco, councillor for Spreydon.
Kia ora, Tim Lindley, community board member for Heathcote.
Good afternoon, Keir Leslie, community board member for Cashmere.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sarah Templeton, Takawingoa.
Kia ora ana, Roy Keneally, community board member for Spreydon.
Kia ora, Jane Walters, community board advisor.
Tēnā koutou. So we've received apologies from Lee Sampson, who's overseas, and also from Tim Scandrett. Do we have a move? I'll move that the apologies be accepted. Yep, second from Keir. Those in favour? Against, abstentions carried. Great. Okay, so today we're here to hear from, we were going to hear from Finn Jackson, but he's unable to make it today. So David Hawke, you're up first, I think. Sorry to spring it on you. Yeah, did you want to come and join us at the table and we can hear what you've got to say? Cool. Did you send through any slides? Cool, okay. The right. There you go. Yep. And if you aim at it, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Right. Tēnā koutou. I'm David Hawke, Secretary of Horsell Residents Association. Normally we'd have either our chairman or our treasurer here, but they're unavailable today, so it's just me. So thanks though for the opportunity of coming to talk to you today. Our topic is through traffic from Selwyn District, about how our problem is also your problem, and a request for some joint work between the two community boards on the issue. So coming to you as part of our ongoing response to a comment made by Councillor Scandrett some years ago. At that stage, at an annual plan hearing, we were supporting a proposed public transport lane coming toward the central city from Curlet's Road in Hillmorton. And if I remember correctly, Tim said, I'm having nothing to do with four-laning Addington Village, which caught us by surprise because we'd been talking about Hillmorton and not Addington. At the end of last year, in response to a proposal for some rather expensive fiddling around with an intersection in Longhurst, which is a new subdivision in Horsell, we had instead argued for a low-cost modal filter, which is in favour of people walking and biking, to turn off the tap on the source of the problem, which is through traffic from new subdivisions in Selwyn District. As you will know, picking up the cue from Councillor Scandrett, what comes through Horsell comes through your part of the city too. So Hoonhay, Cashmere Road and so on. Anyway, the expense of fiddling around was approved, but there was, as part of the deal on that meeting, a report from staff was called for on the modal filter idea and on the issue of through traffic from Selwyn. That report finally came to Horsell Hornby Riccarton Community Board 2 weeks ago on 14th of September, and it was pretty laid back, about 6,000, 8,000 vehicles a day predicted down just a local roads through a subdivision in Horsell, because, so we're told, the road is a connected road. And regardless of road designations, we object strongly to residential streets being used for large volumes of through traffic. And in that particular case, especially since there is a perfectly adequate minor arterial nearby, and there has to be a better way. So our request for you is that you work with our community board to devise a citywide response to this issue of through traffic through residential areas. So your board has previously taken the initiative to run a joint workshop on transport issues in our joint area, and maybe that could happen again. And we will take the same message that I've just given to you to Horsell Hornby Riccarton in their next meeting, which is in 2 weeks' time. So thanks for listening. Kia ora.
Excellent. Thanks very much, David. Yeah, I mean, it is a big issue for our ward. As you know, a lot of our residential areas bear a heavy traffic load with people moving east to west and back home again at the end of the day. Have you got any questions for David? So you're yet to take this sort of to the HHR board. Yeah. Have you had any sort of informal conversations with board members about this issue already?
So what happened is that this came to the previous meeting of Halswell Hornby Riccarton, which was 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And so this is the first opportunity post that meeting to come to any community board.
Cool.
So they don't have the public forum system that this board has. So our next opportunity is with that meeting, which is in about 2 weeks' time.
Cool.
So the response that we had informally, which is from our ward councillor, Andre Moore, is to ask Selwyn District to come to one of our residents association meetings, and we'll probably take it up, but that's not going to fix the problem. But what we would like to have happen is just a conversation about how traffic can be better diverted so that it goes with the designated minor arterial roads rather than through traffic through subdivisions.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, one of the things that we find when we take, I guess, when we take suggested solutions to staff is sometimes it can be a simple yes or no, because the staff will have their view of, a particular treatment for it to solve a particular problem. We often find that we get better results when we take the problem itself to staff and say, how would you solve this problem? So we can have a think about that, and in a couple of weeks' time, I can be in touch with Helen's the chair of that board. Is that right? Yep. But yeah, and otherwise we can discuss it with our board, because it's not so much, I guess your request is not so much a request for staff to act, it's a request of elected members.
Yeah. So it's for the two boards to actually work together to, I suppose, jointly formulate the problem and take that particular issue to staff for a way of working through it. But I think it's really important that because your board obviously, or your area obviously has exactly the same issues, is actually to start and try and think of this in a much more integrated sort of way. And the coverage of the two boards is quite complementary, in that we're sort of the upstream end, you're the downstream end. And so there's a continuity between the two board boundaries in that way.
No, it makes a lot of sense, like you're thinking, David. Sarah, did you have a question in the end, or?
Yeah, I'm just reading through the advice. It talks about the potential for a modal filter to reroute traffic along less appropriate local roads, but I'm not quite sure which roads they will be, unless it's, yeah.
Yes. Are you looking at the report that came to the Halswell Hornby?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So their argument, if I recall it correctly, is that modal filters don't belong on connector roads, they belong on local roads.
That's it.
We're a very simple-minded bunch of people, and we don't see any reason at all when you've got a particular situation, so we've got a hard boundary between Christchurch City, there's green space between our side of Christchurch City and the next part over in Selwyn District, and so why not do some there is the issue of people using back roads to take Callum's lead. The problem is people using back roads to run through built up residential areas and to affect the sense of community of those areas.
It's like extended rat runs, avoiding the big main roads. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much for your time, David.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Kia ora. Thank you very much.
Okay. Chrissy. Oh,
If anyone wants to, it's on page 90 of the Halswell Hornby Riccarton Community Board open agenda paper.
cool.
So,
Thanks. That's helpful,
afterwards.
Sarah. Okay, welcome. And you're here today to talk to us about the Port Hills plan.
Well, we're going to talk to you about the Waihoro-Heathcote River Networks, thinking around the Port Hills plan. So just getting ahead of the game.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm seeing Kia with a hand up. You weren't, we weren't really requesting, action from staff, were you, David? That was what I was trying to get at.
Not from staff, from the board.
Yeah.
And your proposal is to have a chat with Helen.
Yeah. That's where we're starting. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Apologies, Chrissy.
That's right. It's Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Chrissy Williams tōku ingoa, and I think people know Malcolm, Secretary of the network. So I'm here as a committee member of the network. I've been working a lot on thinking about sediment that's coming into the Papaho and all the tributaries. And the Port Hills plan for me is sort of a natural extension of that. So I sort of volunteered to lead some thinking with the network about that. So, and that's an ongoing process. So as you're aware, we've had an interest in the Port Hills, the development of the Port Hills plan through our annual plan submission this year, and also just generally that we want priority to be given to planting the erosion-prone gullies in the Port Hills. So it's ambulance at the top of the hill thinking, rather than, we still have to do a lot of work at the bottom and stopping any of the erosion that's happening on construction and development sites to getting into the river. But the more we can stop at the top of the hill, the better. So that's our aim. And it's not a new idea. I went back and looked at the Waterways and Wetlands Natural Assets Management Plan, 1999, and Paul's saying they still refer to that, and it talks about Port Hills forested valleys. So ensure soil conservation, valley and side gully restoration planting, and there's a map in it that shows every tributary on the Port Hills with potentially having planting over a 40-year plan, so 40-year time zone. So that was 1999. We're now 25 years into that, so we should be halfway through that. It'd be good to see a modern plan of where we are with the planting. But anyway, just saying it's been, the idea's been there for a long time. We're aware that staff are starting, City Council has started to respond to the developing a plan, and we're pleased about that. It's important, no matter where the plan development sits in the council, that it's wider council functions and also Environment Canterbury Dock, Mana Whenua and other organisations are involved in that development. And for us as the network, we really want to engage in this early. Staff said they can't till there's various council and other processes to go through. So we thought we would communicate our priorities early on and table them. So as a contribution to the thinking. Thanks, Aranui. Thank you. So just something, our initial thoughts about who could be involved, and I think it's pretty obvious with Mana Whenua, the various statutory organisations, and I mentioned the Summit Road Protection Authority, which I know Keir chairs. They're a statutory body on the Port Hills, and various other organisations and private landowners, both commercial and farmers, developers and forestry owners. And then there's some trusts and societies that, again, you're aware of, that some of them own land on the Port Hills, like the Summit Road Society and the Mount Vernon Park, Port Hills Park Trust. And then there's us with an interest as recipients of what comes off the hill. So I probably could have found a more recent plan, but there's a recreation plan was published in 2004. Again, it's got some really interesting stuff on it. Some of it's still current again, but probably does need updating, but it's got a lot of good background information. But I just used the map from it. How do you define the Port Hills? And it's generally what's on that map, but whoever you speak to, you will get a different idea. We talked about with the network about, or at least with some of the network, the committee of the network, about what the Port Hills plan might do. And we weren't in total agreement of it. So there's one view that you could take the ridgeline of the Summit Road as the boundary and do a Port Hills plan that involves the north-facing slopes towards the city. And those are obviously of interest to us because that's taking a catchment approach. Some others think that because of continuity of landscape, habitat, tracks and things, that you do the whole Port Hills. A disadvantage of that, though, is that there's a Whakaora Healthy Harbour plan already for Whakaraupo, and I think it would be confusing for them to have two plans, and some of those involved in that Whakaora Healthy Harbour plan have that same feeling. So it's not our decision, but I think taking a catchment approach from the ridgeline down limits what we have to think about. They're quite different environments. The north-facing slopes are very dry, much harder to establish planting, and different slopes. So but just expressing that view, not expecting decisions to be made. The things have changed certainly since the waterways and certainly since the waterways and wetlands plan was written, and that recreation plan in 2004. And I think there's now increased urgency around a lot of things, but from climate change, increased urgency around extreme rainfall and the effects that has on the slopes. And we've seen similar happening in Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay and everywhere really, Nelson, and that's going to happen more often. So the sooner we do something, the better. There's also some urgency thinking around fire. We had the Port Hills fire in 2017, but with the El Nino and drought risks this year, there's increased risk from fire. This community are more, I think, more engaged in wanting to, and obviously are wanting to be more engaged, more involved in planting and biodiversity and pest control, and we're all aware of the various groups that are doing that. So I think that's, again, a reason to have an overarching plan for them to then have their own, have plans that sit underneath that. So, and then there's also the urgency, the effects of subdivisions and development and results of the earthquake and increased subdivision on the hills. So, and lastly, there's a recreational use and increasing pressure from recreation, both in volume, the kinds of recreation, mountain biking, walking, all those things. So, with the Adventure Park opening in 2016, that has certainly put some pressure on the amount of sediment that's coming down into the Ōpāwaho. So the other reason for changes is, I feel, and when I listed some of the national documents and guidance documents, this feels like there's quite a change in direction, and what we as community and council are being asked to think about. And the Te Oranga o Te Tau is coming under the Natural and Built Environment Act. Sorry, I've got an extra line in there. But Te Mana o Te Wai, the national policy statements, those kinds of things. And then more regionally, the Mahanui Iwi Management Plan, which is now 10 years old, it's pretty hard to believe, and the district plan from 2017, which has been constantly amended, as you're aware, and as I mentioned, the Summit Road Protection Act. So there's a lot of sort of guidance documents, but just putting us in a certain direction, we think. And then there's various council documents. Most of them are getting a bit ancient now. Biodiversity strategy and open space strategy, great documents, can I say, having been involved in the panels that worked on those. And then various reserve management plans at a more local level. So there's some regional, more council ones down the bottom there, but I've tried to split them between what applies over council land and other public land. So some of those, I think all the documents above the line apply to both. So, and there's a whole lot more, but that's just a summary. And I think for us, Te Mana o Te Wai is kind of the critical guidance. So we had to think about what would be the purpose of this plan, and then what would be some outcomes. So our purpose is pretty straightforward, but a long-term vision. And it's about integrating land management or land use and freshwater management to achieve Te Mana o Te Wai. So I presume most people know about Te Mana o Te Wai, but if you think of it as the mana of the water. So for us as a network, it's improving, changing and managing what happens on the hills to always have the highest priority is how that impacts freshwater. So that's the tributaries, and that's the main stem of the Ōpāwaho. So we feel that that's a really good basis for thinking about it, and then everything else stems from there. Obviously, we want some actions from this in this Port Hills plan that are funded, but thinking about the water as being the primary purpose of this plan. And so it doesn't exclude recreation, but for example, any tracks that are going to be put in need to think about how they're going to impact on the water. And then we looked at some various, we started talking about objectives, but we decided to call them outcomes. So some of them are quite maybe a bit more visionary or looking ahead. So some of our members wanted us to sort of couch them a little bit less sort of in an idealistic way, I guess, but so the overarching outcome is pretty similar to the purpose. So integrated management is restoring te mana o te wai. And then we want the headwaters and tributaries protected. Thinking about making sure that the hills are stable to protect from erosion and fire. And those are obviously two different things, and the approaches can sometimes conflict with each other. And then 4 others. So biodiversity and natural values being enhanced. That the Port Hills are valued, we said, for low impact recreation. So so low impact both on other users, but also on the Port Hills themselves and for us on the waterways. Landscape and heritage values are interesting. The landscape can have some tensions in it. Certainly if you start talking about a lot of planting on the Port Hills, because people have this vision of the Port Hills as tussock covered. So, but you can still have both. If the tributaries are all green, and you can still keep the tussock at the top without interfering with that control of erosion over the hills, and that all the land uses in the Port Hills are appropriate, sustainable, and within the capability of the land. So they're pretty high-reaching outcomes, but we think those are would be good starting points for some discussion with others and with community, and just being aware that this is just a first cut for us and a first thinking, and we'll still be working, thinking about these. So, so Malcolm, do you want to add anything at this?
Happy to add to that.
Got a question from Tim. Thank you for that. That was really comprehensive.
Yeah, great. With the Port Hills are valued for low impact recreation, what do you envisage would be excluded?
Motorbikes, 4-wheel drive vehicles, and pretty much mostly motorised vehicles.
Motorised vehicles,
yeah. But also thinking about how, for example, how you make mountain bike tracks, that I think they should be hand built, hand dug, not machine dug. And what happened on Montgomery Spur in that lower part, sorry, Paul. But where they used the machine, that scale was pretty major compared with the top part of the track, which was much, done by volunteers and was much more human done. So just not, and that doesn't apply to mountain bike tracks. Any tracking on the Port Hills needs to be done incredibly carefully. And aware of the cutting work on cuttings that EOS has done in trying to remediate cuttings. If we can avoid cuttings that are going to erode it's probably a better way to go. So.
Thank you.
Got a question from Sarah and then Keir.
Thank you. It's nice to know we can just go home now. Thank you. 2 things, actually more commentary than question. Just firstly, just not sure if you realise that we've ended up getting sediment control on building sites is now part of our 3 waters reporting to council. So based on the annual plan submission and things about that, that's now being reported regularly to council, the number of times that the erosion control or sedimentation control hasn't been done properly on building sites. And then that means that they fail it and they have to pay for another visit for someone to come and check their erosion, their sediment control on building sites now, which is good. And that was based on your submission in the annual plan. And the other thing is we now also have a resolution which asks staff to work closely with both mana whenua and other stakeholder groups on the development of this plan, which we hadn't had before. And so there is now a strong direction from council for the early engagement stuff to be happening with groups in the development of the plan rather than bringing something out for consultation. So
yeah, and I suppose we're also hoping that by raising some of these issues from the network point of view, that helps you as a board think about what your priorities and focuses as well.
So it's great. Thank you.
Keir?
Yeah, there's obviously excellent kind of framework for us to start thinking about. Maybe, and this might be slightly more detailed than you've had a chance to think about, In terms of that process of revegetating the gullies, what kind of timeframes and scale would you think that the council should be looking at? And are we talking predominantly hand planting, or are we looking at more landscape scale attempts to kind of revegetate those? I just became curious to think about that's the kind of the scale of the problem there.
Timing yesterday. I mean, that document I referred to had a 40-year vision. I mean, I think we have to go less than that. I think everything's too urgent. So, let's say 20 years. But some of the work that came out of the Christchurch West Melton Zone and workshop that was held at Horswell, and I think did that involve Banks Peninsula Zone as well? So that the two zone committees had that. There's a lot of people doing work on the Port Hills, like Di and Paul and the Rangers are doing work in Bowen Vale and other Dry Valley and a whole lot of other places. There's Mount Vernon Trust are doing a whole lot of work in Avoca and Horitani Valleys, and then that's Summit Rose Society. Then Mount Vernon are doing work on their area of the park, and I imagine Summit Rose also doing work on the Linda Woods Park. So people are doing a lot of work. You've got people like John Marsh and Marie Gray, and you've doing this work, and then there's people doing a whole lot on the rest of the Port Hills and the rest of Banks Peninsula. So one of the aims was to perhaps try and get some kind of guiding, a bit like the erosion sediment toolbox, doing a similar for best practice planting. So I'm not sure I'm asking your question, but I think the groups can, with some good guidance, can do some planting, perhaps on the lower slopes. I think some of the higher slopes may need some commercial contractors to come in. There's a really good video which we could send a link, what's happening in Hawke's Bay, where they're planting carnuka, which is one of the preferred species for us, planting them as like a forestry plants, where they're planting them 2 meters distance, and they're planting bare rooted things, which is much, much cheaper, and they've had incredible success. So I think there's a combination here of volunteer sort of planting potted plants, but I think there has to be also an investment in a much more sort of terrible forestry approach certainly for the upper slopes. So.
Yeah. If I just add to that planting by volunteers is obviously important and necessary, but it's not going to be at the scale.
Yeah, because I guess I think there's a conversation about, I guess, scale and process, that if we want to be hitting that speed, then volunteer capacity probably, particularly in terms of like the post-planting maintenance, is probably going to be pretty challenging. So just, I'm saying that, so I'm curious about when we start to get into the operationalization of it.
There will be a cost.
And some of the slopes are quite steep. I mean, I'm amazed at the volunteers in Barnett Park at what they're planting and steepness, and they're not all young people by any means. I can tell them myself. So yes, so there is a limit to what you can ask volunteers to do, and there's quality issues as well. But also maintenance, incredibly hard to get volunteers to maintain. We do, and the network. Well, our network groups are really good at doing maintenance, but people much prefer planting, which is a pity in some ways.
I had a question as someone who's not really an expert in planning frameworks. From your point of view, at the grassroots level, what is it that makes a plan successful in terms of, especially, I guess, in this context, we've already got a huge number of other operational plans in place. Is it buy-in? Is it funding? Is it what the words on the page actually are? That's
interesting. I was talking with a friend about strategies this morning, and her comment was that get a strategy 60% right, because as soon as you start implementing it, you realise your strategy is never going to be quite right anyway. So,
right.
So I think a plan that expresses what you want to achieve, has some idea of how you're going to achieve that, and then just get on with it and have it an iterative plan, make it adaptable to change as you learn as you go. And absolutely it has to be funded. Just Lower Heathcote River plan. Sorry.
That's a fair shout out. Yeah. I had a question from Mel, and then I'll go to you, Sarah. Yeah. Oh, cool. Sorry.
Yeah, just when it comes to funding, actually, the current proposal in the long-term plan, when it comes to the OPEX and CAPEX stuff that we've been presented by staff in those public briefings that we've been having, the current proposal is to cut the sedimentation and erosion control funding for the Port Hills quite substantially. So that's something we need to be, I was surprised to see it, given that we'd only just really increased it in the last long-term plan. Yeah, so it's something that we need to be cognizant of. And
Okay, and an option would be to see what Environment Canterbury are doing, because I understand their funding, they're going to focus on Whakaraupo. So
yeah,
maybe you could then say, well, the erosion and sediment money should go to the north side, to the other side of the hills, would be quite a good approach.
Was that, Sarah, could I ask, was that a cut or a delay?
My recollection is that it was a cut in funding. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Roy?
In your outcomes that had protect from fire with this summer coming up, is there any key things that could help prevent fires happening?
I mean, it's Paul can talk to you about that at tonight, I'm sure, but yeah, it's and that is the tensions that you get between planting kanuka, which is good because the sheep don't eat it, but it is more fire prone. So I mean, I think it's things like fire breaks between housing. It's mowing, not letting grass get too long, and get fires started. And it's just it's vigilance, absolute vigilance, and but I'll let Paul deal with that. It's sort of beyond my expertise. I've just seen the results.
The absence of idiots is
sad but true. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Chrissy Malcolm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay. Sweet. So we're stopping the live stream recording.